I was 10 years old when Grandma came to live with us. It was about 6 months after Granddad had passed away, and I guess looking back, she must have been lonely in that big house of theirs, rattling around with only the grief and memories for company. So, despite a few protests from Mom, my parents took her in. There were no protests from me, none at all. Grandma was loud and fun and I loved her. She had an almost limitless supply of boiled sweets, and she had always slipped me a couple whenever she saw me. She was always the first to stick up for me when I got in trouble too. But it was her stories I loved the best. And Grandma had all kinds of stories. Stories about growing up during World War II, and stories about the things she would get up to with her friends on the South Coast after her family had been evacuated. Sad stories, funny stories, adventurous stories. But it was her scary stories that were my favorite. And Grandma had lots of scary stories. She told me that she dabbled in the occult when she was a teenager, trying out Ouija boards with her friends, tarot cards, fortune telling, all that stuff. Most of the stories I would laugh off or forget about not long after she was done telling them. But there were a couple that really did spook me a bit. I was only 10 at the time, you have to understand, and Grandma certainly knew how to bring the stories to life. She would shut off all the lights in my room so only the glow of the night sky shone through the curtains, and she would shuffle in real close enough so that I could see the wrinkles on her face and smell the boiled sweets on her breath, close enough so that her deep blue eyes could stare straight into mine. She must have given me nightmares with a few of those tales, but now, years later, there's only one that I can still remember, only one that stuck with me. The story about the shower and Mr. Longfingers. Grandma told me about Mr. Longfingers one night after I had asked about her baths. Grandma used to love her baths. She would spend ages in them, light candles and incense, and lie in the tub humming to herself until the water had turned cold. It drove my mom crazy, but when I asked her why she loved them so much, she said that it was the only place she could relax. It was the only place that was safe for her to relax. Oh, you know, people like me who are, well, more sensitive to certain things, we have to take baths. She told me seriously one night, shuffling closer on the bed. I couldn't possibly spend that long in the shower. It'd be far too risky. And Grandma stared at me with those blue eyes of hers, unsmiling, and I knew that it was time for one of her stories, one of the scary ones. I shivered with pleasure and pulled the covers up to my chin. Oh, why is it risky, Grandma? She half turned to look out the window, watching me from the corner of her eye, pausing for effect. I waited, feeling my heart rate pick up ever so slightly in my chest. Well, she said after a moment, it's only risky if you close your eyes, of course. If you close your eyes for longer than 10 seconds. What do you mean? Why? Well, do you ever play that game in the playground with your friends? The one where someone turns their back and the others sneak up on them when they're not looking. I nodded and Grandma nodded back. Exactly. So, that's what it's like in the shower, when you have your eyes closed. That's what it's like with Mr. Longfingers. A cold itch tickled my back. Who's Mr. Longfingers, Grandma? She let out a deep breath as if she wished she hadn't said anything, turned her head back to face mine. When she spoke next, she lowered her voice. No one knows exactly. Some think it's a creature that's attracted to the heat and smell that we give off in there. Others think it's a demon that finds a way into our realm through the dense steam clouds. No one can say for sure, because the only ones who have actually seen Mr. Longfingers aren't ever going to be able to tell you. I pulled in a breath. Why not? Grandma shuffled closer along the bed and leaned towards me, leaving my question hanging in the air. "Oh, don't worry about it, sweetheart. Don't worry your pretty head. As long as you remember the rules, you'll be fine." "What rules?" "Well, when you're in the shower, you try not to close your eyes for too long. 5 seconds fine, and 10 is just about okay too. But any longer than that..." "Yeah, then what?" "Well, any longer than that and you may just start to feel something in the room with you. Something watching. And if you ever go longer than 15 seconds, that's when you might start to hear a noise too." "Hear what?" "The soft tapping of fingers on glass. Fingers drumming against the glass door of the shower. If you ever do hear that noise, God forbid, you will make me a promise." "What, Grandma?" "Promise me you'll never open your eyes." I barely slept that night, hardly at all. I would close my eyes and try to relax, but every time I did, I would imagine a face pressed against my bedroom window, staring in at me. And when I did finally get to sleep, I had nightmares, bad ones. I had them all week, in fact. Dreams about disembodied eyes watching me in the dark, and long fingers reaching out to touch my exposed skin. It wasn't any better when I was awake either. Not really. The shower was the worst. That's when Grandma's story really got to me. I had never thought about it before, but suddenly, I had trouble shutting my eyes in there. I would stand beneath the beating water, shampoo running down my face, and as soon as I squinted my eyelids closed, I would hear Grandma's words running through my head. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too. But any longer than that..." I would rub my hair fast, feeling the shampoo dripping off my skin, and as soon as I had counted past 5 seconds, I would feel it. A sort of pressure. Not a feeling of being watched exactly, but something close to that. I would run my fingers faster and faster through my hair, frantically trying to get the suds out, and the ready blackness behind my closed eyes coupled with the rush of water in my ears would feel like a held breath, like the silence before a scream. The seconds would race through my mind and I'd be so desperate to open my eyes again that I would sometimes do it before my hair was rinsed fully clean and my eyes would sting with shampoo. But before I shut them again, I would always be sure to peer out through the steamed glass door of the shower cubicle, just to make sure that I was still alone. It wasn't long before Mom realized that something was up. She heard me crying out in my sleep one night and came in to comfort me, asked me what the matter was, and it all came out. I told her about Grandma's stories and about Mr. Longfingers. She got this look on her face when I was telling her, like she used to get with me when I had made her really mad. This wide-eyed and angry look. Only this time she wasn't angry with me. She was angry with Grandma. My parents' room was next to mine, and sometimes if I pressed my ear against the wall, I could hear them talking in there. Soft whispers. That night, though, after Mom was satisfied that I wasn't scared anymore, and she had gone back to her room, the whispers weren't soft at all. Oh no. I heard Mom hissing to Dad about Grandma, about the story that she had told me. Mom's voice floated through the wall, sharp and crisp. "You know what your mother said to him now, don't you, Simon?" And Dad's response was an unintelligible mutter. "She's told him there's a monster that'll get him if he shuts his eyes in the shower. A monster. The poor kid's been having nightmares about it all week. Seriously, Simon, you'd better say something to her tomorrow morning, first thing, or I will." Grandma came to visit me in my room the following night. That time, as she perched on the end of my bed, there were no stories, nothing like that. Grandma just sat there and stared down at me, her blue eyes wide and sad. The light from the moon outside my window lit up her wrinkled face. "You know I'd never let anything bad happen to you, don't you?" she said after a moment. I nodded my head. I know, Grandma. You know, I wouldn't let you come to any harm. I nodded again. Okay, good. That's good. She looked away from me for a moment, out the window. You know, the things I tell you in the evening are meant to help you, sweetheart. They're meant to toughen you up a bit, protect you. She paused and shook her head. But maybe your mom's right. Maybe I went a little too far this time. She looked down at me and smiled. But even then, even though I was only 10 years old, I could tell that it didn't quite reach her eyes. I'll tell you what. You know what I told you about Mr. Longfingers in the shower? Well, I'm going to make sure that you're safe. I'll scare the thing off, how about that? It won't come back in a hurry if it has to face me. I stared up at Grandma, watching her face glow in the moonlight, watching her smile down at me. I nodded my head once. I was the one who found her. I don't know when exactly it happened, but I would guess it was about a week after we had that talk in my room. A week after she told me that she wouldn't let me come to any harm. I woke early that morning from a bad dream to a heavy thumping sound. I sat bolt upright in bed. My room was quiet around me and I couldn't hear anything from the wall that joined my parents' room either. But the house wasn't entirely silent. Floating down the hall, muffled by my closed door, I could hear the sound of rushing water, the noise of the shower. I leapt out of bed and ran down the upstairs hallway, heart already pounding in my chest. As soon as I had reached the closed bathroom door, I started banging on it. A deep terror was welling up inside me like cold water from a well, something that I couldn't place, and I kept banging and shouting, "Grandma!" over and over again, even though she didn't respond. Off to my right, I was dimly aware of voices from my parents' room, the sleepy shuffle of footsteps, but before they had a chance to make it out onto the landing, I had lifted my hand to test out the door handle, more out of instinct than because I thought it might actually open. But the door wasn't locked. I kept banging with my free hand and it swung suddenly inwards, bringing me face to face with a wall of steam. Heat struck my skin and I squinted my eyes against the damp fog and peered into the bathroom. And before Dad had pushed me to one side, before everything around me had descended into shouting and tears and chaos, I saw her. I saw Grandma. She was lying naked on the floor in the shower, the water beating down around her, blue eyes bulging from her face. One hand was curled against her chest like a dead bird, while the other trailed against the glass of the shower cubicle, the flailing finger marks that she had carved through the steam still clear and fresh. It was a heart attack that killed her. That's what my dad told me. He said that Grandma was old and that the thing had struck her quickly and suddenly. She would have died fast and without pain, Dad said. She wouldn't have suffered. I knew better though. Even as a 10-year-old kid, I knew better. And years later, writing this as an adult, I still know better. I also know that my wife and kids resent me for refusing to have a shower in the house, for insisting that everybody take baths. They pretend it's okay and they humor me, but I can tell that they don't really understand it. Not at all. My wife thinks that she does. She thinks that I still carry the trauma of seeing my grandmother dying in front of me when I was little. I guess she's right in a way, but she doesn't know the full truth. Nobody does, and no one would believe me even if I told them. No one would believe me if I said the reason I don't take showers, the reason that I haven't had one since I was 10 years old, isn't because I'm scarred from the sight of a dead body. It's because all those years ago when I crept back into the still hot bathroom after the paramedics had taken Grandma's body downstairs, I made sure to check the marks that her fingers had carved through the steamed glass of the shower. And those marks weren't just on the inside. It's starting to come back to me, slowly bit by bit. I don't know if it was opening up about my grandma's other bedtime story that did it, or the fact that my wife finally persuaded me to try counseling. But whatever the reason, the memories are returning. Memories from my childhood, memories of Grandma, memories of the stories that she used to tell me before I went to sleep. See, I always knew that there were others, other tales that scared me when I was little. But the time before I was a teenager is like a dark landscape. Only a few small patches are lit up. It's getting clearer now, though. The shadows that litter that black land are finally being forced to retreat. The thing is, I'm not sure I want to see what they've been hiding. I must have been around 7 years old when Grandma told me about the special knock. I was tucked up in bed at my parents' first house in my little room at the back at the time. Grandma was perched by my feet. I had been crying. I don't know what upset me, but I remembered my eyes blurring and my nose running. I remember probing a cut on my lip, touching it over and over again with my tongue. I remember the frown on Grandma's face, a look that was half concern and half something else. After she had grabbed a tissue for me and wiped my face, she got up and walked away from the bed, wandered over to the cupboard on the opposite side of my room. I remember that cupboard well. Before we moved to our second home, that cupboard was the source of many sleepless nights for me, many nightmares. I used to imagine all sorts of things about it. I would lie awake sometimes for hours, and I would have to keep peeking my eyes open to check that the cupboard door was still closed, to make sure that it was shut tight. See, whenever my eyes were closed and I heard a creak somewhere in the house, I would imagine it was the cupboard door, that something on the far side was trying to open it ever so softly, so it could come and get me while I slept. I had never told anyone about this fear. Even at 7 years old, I knew that it was stupid, baby stuff. But as I watched my grandma stop in front of the cupboard and lean her wrinkled cheek against the wood, I felt myself growing tense all the same. Even though the lights were on, even though there was an adult in the room with me. And when Grandma closed her eyes and started whispering, I had to fight back the urge to shout for my parents. "Grandma?" I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. "Grandma, what are you doing?" For a few more seconds, she didn't respond, just kept her eyes closed and kept muttering. And then abruptly, she turned to face me again, smiled, and when she came back and resumed her usual position at the foot of my bed, I knew that it was story time. "Did I ever tell you about the special knock, sweetheart?" I shook my head. "No. Well, maybe I was waiting until you were a bit older. The special knock can be wonderful. It can lead you to see things you wouldn't even be able to conjure up in your dreams. But it can also be, well, dangerous." And Grandma glanced away from me towards the bedroom door. "Maybe it's one for another time, in fact. I really should be getting home to see your grandfather, and I wouldn't want to scare you." She started to get up from the bed, but I stopped her. "No, don't go, Grandma. What's the special knock?" And Grandma's blue eyes twinkled. She hovered where she was for a moment and then sat back down. "The special knock is an old trick a friend of mine taught me when I was younger. Not everyone can do it, and not everyone would want to do it. You have to be brave and careful and, well, special." Grandma smiled at me. "Like you." As I watched her, she reached into the front pocket of her cardigan and pulled out 2 boiled sweets, passed one to me. I already had brushed my teeth, and I knew that Mom would kill me if she caught me eating sweets before bed. But this was my time alone with Grandma. Mom was downstairs with Dad. She would never know. I unwrapped the sweet and popped it into my mouth, feeling the sticky mint wash over my tongue. The cut in my lip stung slightly, but I ignored it. When Grandma next spoke, she lowered her voice. When I was over by your cupboard door just now, I was using the magic words. Secret words that only few other people know. Do you know what those words do? I shook my head. They turn a door into a window, a sort of gateway. The thing is, sweetheart, this place you spend your days in, this house where you live, and the building you go to school in, and the town you visit with your mother on the weekends. It's not the only place. There are other places too. And if you use the special knock on that cupboard door of yours now that I've whispered the magic words to it, you'll see them. You'll be able to see those other places for yourself. I stared at Grandma, concentrating on her words, absorbing them. Mint flooded my mouth, but I forgot to swallow. Now listen to me very carefully, Grandma continued, because this is the important bit. The way you open the window is by doing the special knock, but you have to get it right. 7 knocks on the door, that is what you'll want. 7 knocks, no more, no less. And then you open it. You won't be able to step through, but you'll have one heck of a view, all right. I swallowed. A view of what? I don't know its real name, but the woman who taught me the special knock had her own name for it. She called it the lunar plane. 7 knocks takes you to the lunar plane. I could try and describe it to you, sweetheart, but I honestly don't think that I could do it justice. You would just have to see it for yourself. All I'll say is that it's the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen in my life. And trust me, I've seen plenty. Grandma plucked the sweet wrappers from the duvet, put them back in her pocket. She put her hands on her legs as if bracing herself to stand. Then she paused. How many knocks did I say? 7, Grandma. That's right, 7, and don't forget it either. If you get the wrong number and then open the door. She glanced across at the cupboard and frowned. Well, just make sure you don't get the wrong number, okay? Okay, Grandma. And will you make me a promise? What? If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13 or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door, okay? Don't open it, no matter what you hear on the other side. The last thing you want is to open a gateway to the Black Lands. I felt icy fingers down my back. I glanced across at the closed cupboard door in the shadows at the far end of my bedroom. What's the Black Lands? And Grandma stood up and wandered over to me, leaned down and gave me a kiss. You don't want to know, she whispered. I spent the next week avoiding the cupboard. I didn't go anywhere near it, tried not even to look in its direction. Did my best to push Grandma's story as far out of my mind as I could. It wasn't easy. Whenever I was alone in my room and the house was silent, I would feel it. A sort of pull, like when someone tells you not to look at something, and suddenly all you want to do is take a quick peek. The feeling was sort of like that, but it was different too. Stronger. Sometimes when I was lying in bed at night, I would feel the cupboard almost like a weight in my mind, a heavy, static energy. It made me restless, made me want to scrunch up my fists and grit my teeth. When I turned away from the cupboard, my skin itched, like the pores had tiny, invisible bugs in them. It made it hard for me to sleep. And when I did sleep, I had dreams. Sometimes the dreams were pleasant, floaty ones. I would dream that I was on a cloud, hovering through multicolored planes of light, flying through an endless sea of stars. I would wake from these dreams feeling happy and safe, like how I felt when Mom hugged me and stroked my hair. But other times, I had nightmares. The nightmares that I had during that week were the worst that I ever remembered having in my life. Horrible, half-glimpsed blurs, images that I would wake up from with a scream lodged in my throat, my sweat-soaked pajamas sticking to the skin of my back. At the time, I didn't remember the nightmares themselves, at least not completely. But every time that I woke from one, I was left with the same fading image. An image of myself surrounded by thick, choking blackness, dense shadows everywhere. I couldn't see a thing, but I had the sense that I was standing at the center of a vast and open space. Wind howled around me, sounds echoed. I wanted to open my mouth and yell for help, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, because I knew I wasn't alone. It was a week after Grandma's story that I used the special knock. It was a Saturday night and my friend from school, Tim Jacobs, was around. We were having a sleepover. It's been a long time since I last saw Tim, but I can still picture him. Even though he was a month younger than me, I always remembered him looking older. A tall, broad-shouldered kid with green eyes and messy blonde hair, a half-smirk permanently on his face. Tim was one of the most popular kids in our year, and in normal circumstances he wouldn't have had anything to do with me. But our dads were friends from way back, and we had known each other our whole lives. As Tim often liked to remind the kids at school, he was forced to hang out with me. "When are you gonna get a TV in your room? Or a computer?" Tim sat in his pajamas, slumped in the chair by my desk. He was fiddling with my desk lamp, switching it on and off. His face lit up with light and then disappeared, and then lit up again. This wasn't the first time that Tim had asked me a question like this. Whenever we had sleepovers at my house, he spent the whole time moaning about my lack of stuff. No TV, no computer, no PlayStation. I had board games and I had books, but that was about it, and Tim had no interest in those things. "You know my mom won't let me," I muttered back. It was 10 p.m. and we were both speaking in half whispers. We had been told to go to sleep at 9 p.m. and Mom had already been up to give us one warning for talking. I knew from past experience that one warning was all you wanted to get. Mom had a short fuse and she wouldn't be above grounding me if I wasn't careful. I knew that we were safe if we kept our voices low though. Mom and Dad were both downstairs in the lounge watching TV, some film. The faint tinny sound of laughter drifted upstairs every now and then. As long as we weren't too loud, they wouldn't hear us. I glanced warily at Tim, who was still fiddling with the lamp. He was in a restless mood. He had been silent and sullen most of the evening, rolling his eyes whenever I suggested stuff for us to do. Bad signs. From knowing him so long, I knew that he could get reckless when he was bored. Reckless and mean. "You know what I think," said Tim now, keeping his eyes on the lamp. He was talking slowly and carefully, punctuating his words with a flick of the lamp switch. "What I think is that your mom is an idiot." He put extra emphasis on idiot, savoring the word, the adultness of it. And then he stared across the room at me, fixing his green eyes on mine. I felt my own eyes prickle and suddenly had to fight to hold back tears. I looked away from Tim and my eyes found the cupboard. "I know what we could do," I said suddenly. Tim followed my gaze. "I'm not playing any more of your stupid board games. That's kid stuff." "No, this isn't a board game. This is a secret that I caught myself. A secret someone showed me." "Oh yeah, what secret?" Tim's voice still had an edge to it, but at the same time I could tell that I had caught his interest. This was my best tool when Tim was in a bad mood. Distraction. If I argued or disagreed with him, he would only make fun of me more. But if I could get his mind on something else, I might be okay. So basically, there is this special knock somebody taught me. If I do a special knock on that cupboard door and then open it, we'll be able to see something really cool. Tim rolled his eyes. Yeah, right. No, really. A witch taught me how to do it. She had cast a spell on the door, and now I can take us anywhere that we want to go just by knocking on it. Tim stood up from the chair by my desk. The lamplight spilled over his face. His expression was half smirk, half scowl. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard, he said. And it's dumb even for you. How about instead of knocking on the door, I knock on your head a bunch of times? How about that? He took a step towards me and I panicked. Well, if you're too scared to try it, I'll understand. This was a big risk and I knew it. But as soon as the words were out, Tim paused. Why would I be scared? I'm not scared of nothing. I shrugged. Well, the spell the witch did is dangerous. Really dangerous. Like if we get the number of knocks wrong and I do more than I should, we could go someplace bad. Tim glanced across to the cupboard door and then looked back at me. His face was hard to read. Wait, so how many knocks is it meant to be then? 7, I said quickly. 7 takes us to this awesome place. But the witch told me that if we get the knocks wrong, especially if we get close to 13 or something like that, then the door opens someplace different, someplace scary. And Tim was no longer scowling. He looked across at the cupboard door again, a slight frown on his face. After a few more seconds, he shrugged his shoulders. Okay, go on then. Let's try it. The brief wave of relief that I felt was extinguished as soon as I turned to the cupboard door. It stood a few feet away from me, just outside the glow of the desk lamp. In the shadows. It seemed stupid to think that the cupboard wasn't anything more than just a cupboard. Baby stuff. But then again, as I looked at it, I remembered the dreams that I had been having all week. The nightmares. And Grandma's words from the previous weekend floated back to me. If you get the wrong number and then open the door. And Grandma hadn't had her storytelling face on when she had warned me about getting the number wrong. She had had her serious face on, I was sure of it, as though she really meant what she was saying. And what was it she had said about 13 knocks? If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13 or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door, okay? Don't open it, no matter what you hear on the other side. I shivered. Still, that was all right, wasn't it? I would just have to make sure that I only knocked 7 times. I would count as I went, easy peasy. I pulled in a deep breath and stepped towards the cupboard. I felt Tim's eyes on me. From downstairs at the edge of my hearing, I caught laughter floating up from the lounge. It's okay, I told myself. Your parents are downstairs, and besides, nothing's really going to happen. I mean, is it? Grandma can't really turn doors magic. Get on with it, said Tim. If you're going to do your special needs knock or whatever the heck it is, then do it, okay? Don't just stand there. I ignored him, and by now I was directly in front of the cupboard door, and I could feel that tingle again too, that pressure. Beneath my pajamas, my skin was all goosebumps. It might have only been the slight chill in my bedroom and nothing more than that. But then again, I knew it was more than that, and I could feel it in my mind. A heaviness that was like the start of a headache, a pull behind my eyes. As I reached up and made my right hand into a fist, it felt like I was no longer in control of my body. Knock. I struck the wood with my fist softly. The sound was dull and hollow. Knock. I felt Tim at the edge of my vision moving up beside me. Knock. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint sound. Knock. At first, I thought it was noise from the TV downstairs, but knock. And then I thought it might be coming from outside my bedroom window and knock. And then it sounded as though it was all around me and knock. Finally, as my fist struck the door for the 7th time, I realized what the sound was. A whistle, a faint, low hum, coming from inside the cupboard. The echo of my final knock faded, melting into the noise beyond the door. My skin tingled. I stepped forwards, almost in a trance, my hand reaching for the doorknob. And then I felt myself shoved to one side as Tim pushed past me, and he did the unspeakable. Before I had a chance to stop him or even so much as call out, Tim had thumped his fist against the door 6 more times, making the total number of knocks 13. Beyond the cupboard, the whistling sound stopped. Tim reached out and gripped the doorknob. "Don't!" My words were only a half whisper, but something in my voice made Tim pause. Still clutching the doorknob, he turned to look at me, and the grin on his face grew wider as he saw the fear on mine. When he next spoke, his voice was a parody of shock and concern. "Oh no, did I get the special needs knock wrong? Did I make it all scary for poor little Christopher?" Tim pouted out his lower lip. "Is little Christopher scared of the big bad monsters in the cupboard?" I listened for the whistling noise beyond the door, for any noise beyond the door, but could no longer hear anything. "Don't open it, Tim, I'm serious." "Oh, you're serious, are you? Oh, okay, I didn't realize how serious you were. I wouldn't want you telling your mommy on me." Tim took his hand away from the door and rolled his eyes, and turned away. I felt my body begin to untense, but just as I was turning away too, Tim spun back around and grabbed for the doorknob. Terror rolled through me in a sick wave. I turned just in time to see the cupboard door flying open. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound died in my throat when I saw what was on the other side. Nothing. Nothing at all. Just some clothes hanging up and toys littering the floor. The exact same view I had whenever I looked in the cupboard. Nothing else. "Oh wow, the look on your face." I turned to see Tim with his hands on his knees, his body shaking with laughter. "You looked like you were gonna wet yourself. Oh, Chris, the guys at school are gonna love this." I felt my cheeks burning. I turned away from Tim and stared into the shadows of the cupboard. I told myself that I wouldn't cry, told myself that Tim would be gone in the morning anyway. I turned away from the cupboard and walked back across my room towards my single bed. "Where are you going?" "To sleep." "Oh, what's wrong, Christopher? Did your special needs cupboard not work?" "Shut up." I was halfway across the room by that point, but when the cupboard door slammed shut behind me, I jumped. I looked back and saw Tim standing in front of it staring after me, no longer laughing. "What did you say to me?" "Just leave me alone, Tim. I'm going to sleep and you should as well. If you keep banging around, Mom's gonna hear you and then we'll both get grounded." Tim's frown deepened for a moment and then faded. He glanced towards the bedroom door. As he paused to listen, I knew that he could hear what I heard. Footsteps on the stairs. The TV had gone off and my parents were getting ready for bed. Tim looked back at me and shrugged, but when he spoke next, he had lowered his voice. "Whatever, I'm bored anyway. There's never anything to do around here." He made his way over to a sleeping bag, which was set up near the bedroom door. I walked over to my desk and switched the lamp off, and then made my own way to bed. I suddenly felt exhausted. As I clambered under the covers, I heard Tim's voice, a soft hiss in the darkness. "Night-night, Christopher. Don't let the cupboard monsters bite." His laughter followed me into an uneasy sleep. It was a noise that woke me, a soft tapping like fingertips drumming on wood. I had a vision of Tim on my desk, tapping his fingers against the surface while he switched the lamp on and off. But when I creaked my eyes open, the room was still dark, and my desk chair was empty. Tapping. I hadn't dreamed it, the sound was still there, constant and steady, coming from the far side of the bedroom. Dread surged through my chest and stomach, forcing me fully awake. I lifted my head from my pillow slowly and peered into the shadows. Tim was standing in front of the cupboard, his back facing towards me, blonde hair sticking up in clumps, still messy from sleep. As I watched, he took a step closer to it, then another. Finally, he began to reach out a hand as if in slow motion for the cupboard's doorknob. "Tim," I spoke in a low hiss. "Tim, what are you doing?" He didn't react, just kept reaching his hand out, his fingertips now inches from the door. The tapping continued, and it was growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from inside the cupboard. As I kicked back the duvet and swung my legs out, Grandma's words raced through my mind. "Whatever you do, don't open that door. Don't open it no matter what you hear on the other side." "Tim!" I hissed his name again as my feet hit the carpet. He didn't react. From the way that he was moving, I had the idea that he might still be unconscious, either that or in some type of trance. The tapping became louder still. As I hurried across the room, Tim's fingertips found the doorknob. The tapping sound had stopped. I skidded to a stop a few feet from where he stood, terror rooting me in place. "Tim, don't!" He half stirred. I saw his head move, turning slightly towards me. I caught a glimpse of one green eye, open but glazed over. And then Tim tugged the door open. The hinges squealed as it moved. Tim hadn't put much force behind his pull, so the door creaked open slowly. And it didn't open all the way, only about a foot. But that was enough. It was enough for me to glimpse the swirling, ink-thick blackness beyond. A darkness that was far too dense to be explained away with shadows. It was enough for me to hear the distant howling, like storm wind battering the eaves of a dilapidated house. And it was enough for me to feel a sense of dread that was worse than anything that I had ever felt before in my life. Tim, wake up!" My voice wasn't any louder, but this time it seemed to get through. Tim let go of the doorknob. He turned towards me and I saw him blink rapidly, saw the glazed look leave his face. For a second his green eyes found mine, and he opened his mouth to say something. And then long fingers stretched from the cupboard and found his throat. I didn't scream, I couldn't. I couldn't, only stare on in shock as the fingers wrapped themselves around his neck. Guh. Tim tried to speak, but he couldn't. He could only make the same strangled noise, like a baby struggling to make itself understood. Guh. I listened to that noise in horror, still rooted to the spot. Time was moving impossibly slowly. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place on the carpet. I only know that it was long enough for me to get a clear view of those fingers, which were like a cross between tree branches and tentacles, tightening on Tim's throat. Long enough for me to see his strained face turning from red to purple, to watch as the veins in his forehead stood out like worms beneath the skin. Long enough for me to see him stretching out a hand towards me, the fingers flailing in my direction while the terror grew on his face. That was what finally snatched me out of my shock, Tim's hand. Something about seeing Tim, a kid who dominated playgrounds and sports fields for as long as I had known him, reaching out towards me with desperation in his eyes. Without pausing to think what I was doing, I ran forwards and grabbed him. I grabbed his hand. For just a second, I felt his grip tightening on mine. Wind howled in the distance. My eyes locked on Tim's. And then with the force of a plaster being ripped from a cut, Tim was snatched backwards. 1 minute he was holding my hand and the next he had vanished. I had a brief impression of him flying through the air, screaming as he was pulled through the dark gap in the cupboard's door, and then he was gone, his cries swallowed by the distant wind. I stared down at my empty hand, too many emotions raging through me to process, and only looked up again when I heard the crash of the cupboard door banging shut. And by the time I heard footsteps and voices on the landing beyond my room, I had started to cry. Tim was never seen again, gone without a trace. When my parents first came into my bedroom that night, they thought that it was all a game. Hide and seek that had gotten out of hand. I kept telling them that Tim was in the cupboard, but whenever my dad opened it to check, he couldn't find anything. Just these same old piles of clothes and toys. Later, when the police came, I told them the same thing that I had eventually told my parents, that I had seen something grab Tim and pull him into the cupboard. A hand that came out of the darkness and wrapped itself around his neck. None of them believed me. I mean, why would they? Looking back, I can see myself through their eyes. Just an upset and terrified little kid whose friend had gone missing. Maybe they thought that I had had a nightmare, or maybe they thought that I had seen something, an abductor pulling Tim through the bedroom window, perhaps. But my frightened mind had simply confused the details. Either way, whenever I mentioned the cupboard, they dismissed it. There was only one person who didn't. We were already in our new home when I next saw Grandma, our second one a few towns over. At the time, I hadn't really understood why we were moving. I had overheard Dad telling Mom that the talking would never stop if we didn't leave, but I hadn't really got what he had meant. I didn't care though. Moving meant that I could go to a new school and get away from all the whispering kids in the playground. It also meant that I would never have to see Tim's mom, who had turned up outside the school gates one day to scream questions at me again. But mostly it meant that I could get away from the cupboard. It meant I could sleep. My parents had eventually set my bed up in the spare room when I refused to step back in my own bedroom, but even that hadn't helped. Not really. Because I still knew that it was in there. I could still feel it. The thought of that cupboard was like a horrible itch in my mind. I kept wanting to scratch at it, but that only made it worse. Moving houses got me far away from it once and for all. And a couple of weeks after we had moved, I finally saw Grandma. I had been asking Mom and Dad if I could see her ever since the night that Tim had disappeared, but they had kept putting it off. Said that it wasn't the right time and that I could see Grandma once everything was more settled. But finally, after our furniture was moved in and they grew fed up with my pestering, I got my wish. Grandma came around for the evening, and at bedtime, I asked her if she could come up and tuck me in, and she agreed. The second that the door to my new room was shut, I started babbling, telling her about the cupboard door and the special knock, about how we knocked 13 times, about what happened to Tim. She listened at first, but as I grew more and more worked up, she finally came over and started stroking my hair. "Shh, shh, sweetheart," Grandma whispered. "It's okay, it's going to be okay. You're safe now. But can the thing in the cupboard find me here?" "Oh, what? Oh, no. You don't need to worry about anything in the cupboard. The magic words only work once, and I don't have to use them again if you don't want me to. I meant you're safe from him." "From who?" "Oh, from that boy who was bullying you now, sweetheart. From Timothy." And Grandma smiled and stroked my cheek. "Your little friend's in the Blacklands now." The temperature in my room was warm, but my skin suddenly felt cold. I stared up at Grandma. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "Oh, don't you remember when I last came to see you and tucked you in? You had been crying and you had a cut lip. And before I told you about the special knock, you told me that your friend, a boy called Timothy, had tripped you up in the playground. You said that he did it in front of the girls in your class and that they all laughed at you." I stared at Grandma, thought back to the last time that I had seen her. I remembered the feeling of having cried recently, and I remembered the cut in my lip. Remembered probing at it with my tongue while Grandma spoke. But I couldn't remember telling her about Tim tripping me. Tim was... I grasped for the right words and came up short. "Tim's my friend, Grandma." "Well, I'll tell you something for free, sweetheart. Anyone who hurts you to make themselves feel bigger is not your friend." And Grandma frowned for a second and then smiled again. "But like I said, you don't need to worry about him anymore. Timothy's in the Blacklands and he'll never get out." And Grandma leaned down towards me. Her breath smelled like sweets and mint. "I can't have anyone hurting my Christopher, can I? Now give your grandma a big kiss and say thank you." She leaned closer to me. There were so many questions and emotions swirling through me that my head felt like it was going to burst. I almost flinched away from Grandma, but I stopped myself at the last minute. As her face came closer to mine, instinct kicked in. "Thank you, Grandma," I mumbled, giving her a kiss on the cheek. "You're welcome, Christopher," she whispered. Why would you tell a 5-year-old kid such a messed up tale? Ever since the memory of my 5th birthday came back to me, this is the question that I kept asking myself, but I don't have the answer. I suppose I shouldn't be that surprised, given the other stories my grandmother told me when I was little. The one about Mr. Longfingers and the secret of the special knock. I really shouldn't be surprised at all. What follows is a memory from the day that I turned 5. I must have been repressing that day for years because it's taken weeks of therapy for me to unlock it. "Grandma, would you tell me a story before bed?" She was halfway to the bedroom door when my words stopped her. I didn't want her to go. Grandma just tucked me in and turned off my bedside lamp, and I suddenly felt afraid. Partly it was the darkness of my bedroom. The shadows were so thick that I could barely make out my stuffed toys, sitting in a row on top of my dresser. But mainly, it was my new birthday present. The present that Grandma had got me. It wasn't my main present. That was the pack of monsters and my pocket toys that I had ripped open downstairs. No, this was an extra present. A secret present. I hated it. Even in the dark, I could see its shadowy outline on my bedside table. The thing gave me the creeps. "A story? Well, what kind of story would you like to hear?" It was a silly question because Grandma only had ever told me one kind of story. The scary kind. But because I was already a bit freaked out, I said something that I wouldn't normally have done. "Nothing too scary, Grandma." Grandma raised her eyebrows at me. "Not too scary." I shook my head. She leaned over and switched my bedside light back on and then perched at the foot of my bed, smiled down at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still see Grandma's present. It was watching me from my bedside table. I did my best to ignore it. "Okay," said Grandma, making herself comfortable. "I think I'll tell you a story about a witch." "Once upon a time," Grandma began, "there was a young woman who lived in a cottage by the sea. She didn't have a care in the world. She went to school and she painted, and she read adventure books by the fire in the evening. This girl lived with her mother and her grandmother, and they were all very close. She loved her family very much. One day in the early summer, the girl was coming home from school when she met a boy on the path. She had never spoken to him before, but she recognized him well enough. He wore the same uniform that she did after all, and she guessed that he must be in the year above her at school. "Where are you off to?" said the boy. His shirt was untucked and he was smoking a cigarette. The girl hesitated. Her mother told her that cigarettes were bad. She had also told her never to speak to strangers on her way home from school. But then again, thought the girl, was this boy actually a stranger? The headmaster at their school said that they were all one big family. If this boy wore the same uniform as her, they couldn't really be strangers, could they? "I'm going home," answered the girl. "My house is along this path." The boy finished his cigarette and then flicked it into the grass. He smiled at the girl. "Before you go home, don't you want to see something cool?" he asked. The girl was curious, but she also knew she couldn't be late. Her mother would worry terribly if she was late. So she thanked the boy and told him that she had to be on her way. But just as she had walked past him, he called out to her again. "It's a puppy," said the boy. "Our dog had a litter of puppies last week and Dad said that I could keep one. It's in this old barn near my house. Don't you want to see the puppy?" Now, the girl loved puppies. She had wanted a dog for as long as she could remember, but her mother always said that they could not afford one. Right then, she would have given anything in the world to pet a cute little puppy. When she closed her eyes, she could just picture it. A happy little dog with a big pink tongue and a wagging tail, eager to meet her. The girl paused and looked down the path that led back to her house. She thought about her mother, and then she looked back at the boy who was smiling at her. Was there really any harm, thought the girl, in taking a quick look? So the girl followed the boy and he led her over a stile and across a big field. And they kept going and going and going until the girl saw a large barn towering in the distance. And she was so excited that she walked as fast as she could, and the boy laughed and walked right along with her. The girl had only started to feel nervous when they were right outside the barn. It had taken longer to get there than she had thought it would, and the sun was a lot lower in the sky now. She was going to be late getting home. Her mother would be worried. She wanted to see the puppy quickly so that she could hurry back, but the barn was dark and full of shadows and she couldn't see any sign of it inside. "It's just over here at the back," whispered the boy as he took her hand and led her into the shadows. "He's going to be so excited to see you." So the girl took his hand and followed him, and even though his palm was sweaty, she held onto it tight because she was suddenly starting to feel afraid. It was only when she heard footsteps and laughter behind her and turned to see two bigger boys emerging from the barn's shadows that the fear inside her had turned to terror. When the girl finally got back home, the sun was setting over the ocean and the sea was the color of blood. The girl made it through the door of the little cottage before she collapsed in a heap in the hallway, crying her eyes out. It was her grandmother who found her like that. Now, the girl's grandmother was very old and very wise. Mother used to tell her that Grandma had lived so long and seen so much that she knew all of the world's secrets. When she was little, the girl had been frightened of her grandmother. But now the old lady took the young woman in her arms and she comforted her, told the girl that her mother was working late and that she wouldn't be home for a while, told the girl she could tell her anything she wanted. And in the hallway of their little cottage, the girl did. She told her grandmother about the boy in the barn and all the horrible things that those bigger boys had done to her in the shadows. And her grandmother listened, and she grew very silent and very still. "Come with me," she said. The girl had hardly ever been in her grandmother's room before. When she was little, it always gave her the creeps. Her grandmother had lots of old and scary paintings on the walls and strange little statues and carvings on her shelves. But right then, as her grandmother led her to an old wooden chair and sat her down, the girl hardly even noticed them. Her grandmother was speaking to her in a soothing voice, and all she could do was listen. She listened as her grandmother told her that there was a special trick she knew, a trick to protect against evil, a trick to protect her against those horrible boys, so that they would never be able to hurt her again, so that she would have control of them. As grandmother spoke, she fetched an old wooden box from the bottom of her wardrobe and unlocked it. Inside the box were countless knitted dolls. All of the dolls were the same blank cream color, with no facial features at all save for the eyes. Every single doll had a pair of eyes that seemed to follow the girl. As grandmother pulled 3 dolls out of the box, she closed her own eyes and began to whisper. The sound made the girl's skin itch, but it didn't last for long. Soon her grandmother had lined the dolls up on the carpet and her eyes were open again. The last thing she pulled from the box were a pair of black knitting needles and some yarn. "Oh, those boys that hurt you, sweetheart," she whispered. "I want you to describe them to me." And although she was still terrified and although it made her feel sick, the girl did. She described the boys as well as she could remember. She described them as her grandmother went to work with her needles. And finally, with the blood-red sun disappearing below the sea outside the cottage window, the dolls were finished. The girl's grandmother took the girl by the hands and looked into her eyes. "I want you to keep a hold of these dolls, sweetheart," she whispered. "As long as you have possession of them, those boys will never be able to hurt you again." And do you know what? Those boys never did. The girl was sitting in an armchair overlooking the sea when her grandmother burst through the door of the cottage. It was 2 days after they had made the dolls, and for the first time since she had met the boy on the pathway, the girl was feeling calm again. She was feeling calm, but her grandmother clearly wasn't. As the girl turned from the window and smiled in greeting, the old woman held a newspaper out to the girl with shaking hands. "3 brothers tortured and killed in brutal mass slaying," read the headline. "Agatha," whispered her grandmother. "Oh, Agatha, what did you do?" But the girl just kept smiling. She kept smiling as she took her grandmother by the hand and led her upstairs to the bedroom. She kept smiling as she opened her little cupboard and pulled out a cardboard box. And when the old lady cried out in shock and horror as she saw the 3 dolls inside, the girl kept smiling still. "What did you do, Agatha?" whispered her grandmother again. But it was pretty obvious what the girl had done. Each of the dolls had been impaled with at least a dozen sewing pins, all of which had been pushed through their knitted heads. The area below each of their waists had been burned black with a flame. The girl smiled down at her work and took her grandmother's shaking hands in her own. "They won't be hurting anyone now, will they?" she whispered. "You see, sweetheart," said Grandma as she stood up from my bed and switched off the light. "I gave you one with a happy ending." I lay in the dark feeling sick. I don't think that I had understood everything Grandma had told me, not right then, at least, but I had understood enough. I had understood enough to know that I felt worse now than I had before the story had started. "Grandma, wait," I said, my voice stopping her mid-turn. "Isn't your name Agatha?" Grandma looked back at me and smiled. She walked over and leaned down, kissing me on my forehead. "Oh, time to go to sleep, Christopher," she whispered. "And remember, that present that I got for you is always there if you ever need it." She stood up and left my bedroom. I stared after her. But a few moments later, my eyes were pulled back to the gift on my bedside table. The knitted doll. It gazed right back at me, its face featureless, save for 2 blank, staring eyes. Thousand Asada, Die Screaming, Meat Casher, Talamagara, Degi, Leon Knott, Jimmy Griffin, Miss Eldridge, Sleepy Shroomy, Takio Zarilla, Richard French, Mina Lynn Kidder, Mark Norman, Andrew Harrington, Swaggity Swoot, Omni Rubik, Sonic GMD, Lunas TV, Rolly, Wayward Son, Caleb Windsor, Never Enough, Russell and Flo, Stevie B7649, Ray Weingartner, Stephen King 04,